Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. I'm your host, Bob Boudelier. This podcast, my website, and my community are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who bring me into their programs as a technical product accelerator to work alongside their teams to help them develop products smarter and faster without adding risk, while bringing human-centered AI skills into their organizations. I also want to thank those who have subscribed to GetWrangler.ai, which lowers AI costs across your organization for those who use large language models via the API. You can learn more at www.innoguide.net or at GetWrangler.ai. In this episode, number 100, we'll be sharing part 2 of Incorruptible by Eric Ries. There's a moment in consulting work that never leaves you. Eric says, I was having dinner with employees from a company where I'd just run workshops. The meetings had gone well, real breakthroughs, genuine engagement, but something felt wrong. Then a commercial came on television. The company whom he was working for at the time with those people was advertising itself as a place where scientists and engineers collaborate to make the world a better place. The table went silent. Then laughter. Bitter, exhausted laughter. One engineer turned to him and said, I sent that exact ad to my mom when I got hired. When asked what actually drove promotions in reality, they all spoke at once. Hitting targets, cutting costs, avoiding waves, market share, market share, market share. This is what he calls organizational incoherence, where what gets rewarded directly contradicts what gets proclaimed. Your values live on the wall, but they're betrayed by daily reality. An incoherent company is like an autoimmune disease, slowly weakening itself from within. The antidote comes from Mary Parker Follett, a management theorist from the 1920s who understood something profound. Organizations need an invisible leader, a common purpose that guides actions when nobody's watching. Real values live in culture, not in commands. Yet many leaders struggle with this because culture can't be commanded. It can only be fostered, systematically and deliberately. He's developed what he calls the alignment method, 3 interconnected tools that work together. The first is the culture bank. Every decision in your organization makes either a deposit or a withdrawal. In one of his examples, a store manager for H-E-B gave away groceries during a power outage in Texas in 2021. In this act, he made a massive deposit. It wasn't dictated from corporate. It emerged from 16 years of institutional muscle memory. Since Hurricane Rita in 2005, H-E-B had built an explicit philosophy. When you feed half of Texas, you're responsible during crises. Every store manager knew this without being told. And H-E-B is a large food retail chain. The Leader Guide is your second tool. Documents, real stories, showing what mission-aligned leadership actually looks like. Sarah did this. It embodied who we are, and she was rewarded for it. Duolingo calls theirs the trust battery. They document how they rejected a brilliant candidate who was disrespectful to an airport driver, proving that excellence includes how you treat others. And then the third one is the two-way review. Traditional reviews evaluate individuals. Two-way reviews work in both directions. The company evaluates employees, and collected employee stories evaluate the company's culture. When a customer service rep sacrifices her metrics to fix a billing error harming thousands, that's a defining moment worth capturing. Next year, another employee facing similar choices has proof that the right action actually pays off. But here's the critical insight. The culture bank exposes something fundamentally broken about objectives-based management. When employees only received quantitative targets, they can boost numbers by cutting corners, shipping buggy software, overselling capabilities. The culture bank makes visible what's really happening, a withdrawal from the trust. He calls this the Todd Park rule from Devoted Health CEO. Don't make withdrawals from the culture bank, only deposits. That sounds impossibly rigid, but it actually simplifies everything by eliminating endless exceptions. When there are no exceptions, anyone can confidently push back against the trust-damaging shortcuts. He calls these people torchbearers, engineers, marketers, product managers who relentlessly uphold your mission even when nobody's watching. They need protection from spreadsheet wielders wanting to compromise. Obviously, firing underperformers, setting firm deadlines, saying no to unreasonable requests, these are deposits in accountability. Intentional betrayals of trust are what bankrupt culture. How does this framework scale? GitLab shows us. With nearly $800 million in revenue and 2,000 employees, they've systematized it through what their founder calls the handbook first doctrine. Nothing becomes real until it's documented. Their public handbook, almost 4 million words and growing, has become their actual operating system. They've embedded their values through 22 concrete mechanisms: hiring criteria, promotion decisions, compensation reviews, feedback processes, even default software settings and company song lyrics. The results are stunning. A $15 billion IPO, over half the Fortune 100 as customers, and a net retention rate of 123%. Their transparency attracted 4,000 unpaid open-source contributors, creating loyalty that transcends typical vendor relationships. Yet, GitLab faces a critical challenge. Their cultural coherence currently depends on founder Sid Sijbrandy's super voting shares. As they face competition from tech giants and acquisition pressure, the question becomes, how do you protect this achievement structurally rather than personally? That's the real work ahead. This segment is about one of the most consequential decisions you'll make as a founder or mission-driven leader: how you structure the governance of your company. And he starts with a story that explains why this matters so much. Years ago, he said, he sat down with Jeff Lawson, founder and CEO of Twilio, just as his company was preparing for its IPO. Jeff had built something really special, a mission-driven company from the ground up, and he understood something critical. Once you go public, protecting that mission becomes infinitely harder. So he negotiated for super voting shares that gave him disproportionate voting power, but with a catch. The protection was set to automatically sunset after 7 years. Twilio's IPO in 2016 was spectacular. It opened at $15 per share. When it hit $443 in February 2021, Twilio had a market cap of nearly $70 billion. But here's where the story takes its turn. Exactly 199 days after Jeff's super voting shares expired, he was forced out by activist investors who owned less than 0.5% of the company. Company wasn't failing, even after the stock had dropped 80% from that peak. Twilio was still up almost 400% from its IPO price. Revenue had grown by 1,400%. The mission holder simply wasn't protected anymore. This pattern repeats over and over again. When founders ask about mission protective structures, they're told it's too early, at seed stage, during growth rounds, pre-IPO. Then if you make it to public market, it's mysteriously too late. He sat in rooms full of IPO professionals watching them nod along when a CEO insisted on mission protections, then laugh about it the moment he left. They knew the delays would work. So what's the answer? The Public Benefit Corporation is a legal structure that encodes your mission directly into the corporate charter. Instead of boilerplate language about pursuing any lawful act, which is pretty generic, a PBC commits to an explicit public benefit. Anthropic commits to responsible development of advanced AI systems. Patagonia pledges to use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. Here's what makes this powerful, though. PBC directors can legally balance shareholder interests with that stated public benefit. They're protected by an enhanced business judgment rule, meaning they only need to show their decisions were rational and informed, but not necessarily profit maximizing. You can incorporate as a PBC from day one or convert with just a 2-page filing. The structure is available in 44 U.S. states and many jurisdictions worldwide. Leading AI companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, universally reject standard shareholder primacy governance. They recognize that transformative technology demands mission-aligned decision-making, not quarterly earning obsessions. These companies protect their missions through interlocking defenses, mission-lock structures, founder control, or models like Alibaba's, where long-tenured employees collectively nominate a board majority. But here's the tension. Founder control solves one problem while creating another. Mark Zuckerberg's supervoting shares let Facebook reject a $1 billion Yahoo offer and remain independent. Yet unchecked founder power creates accountability gaps. Research shows that concentrated power literally rewires brains, diminishing empathy while amplifying overconfidence, what researchers call hubris syndrome. The real goal isn't founder control, it's mission control, where the mission itself, not any individual, holds the ultimate authority. So here's how you build a governance fortress with layered protection. Start with professional integrity. We require doctors, engineers, and lawyers to take oaths protecting their work against outside pressure. Yet we demand virtually nothing from boards of directors. Every mission-driven company should require a formal board mission pledge embedded in the corporate bylaws with real legal teeth. CFOs who swore integrity oaths reduced earnings manipulation by 20% and operational manipulation by 15%. Broader studies show pledges reduced dishonest behavior by nearly half. But individual pledges need structural reinforcement. Consider tenured voting, where voting power grows continuously from 1 to 10 votes over 10 years. Or co-determination, which puts stakeholder representatives on boards. The John Lewis Partnership shows this working at scale. For nearly a century, 74,000 employee partners have collectively owned the UK retailer through a trust. When facing financial pressure in 2023, they rejected outside investors to maintain their sovereignty. John Lewis generates over £12 billion in revenue. Here's what skeptics miss, though. Mission control governance creates more value for everyone. Purpose-driven companies outperformed the S&P 500 by 1,681% versus 118% over 15 years. Mission-driven companies grow 3 times faster than their competitors. Yet, governance experts pushing, quote, best practices are destroying shareholder value. The data is overwhelming. Dual-class stocks actually outperform single-class ones by almost 36% over 1 year. Consider Costco versus Kroger. In 2006, Kroger did everything the governance playbook demanded, declassified their board, eliminated supermajority requirements, and let protections expire. CEO David Dillon called it the highest standards of corporate governance. Meanwhile, entrenched Costco massively outperformed them. A $10,000 investment in Costco at IPM is worth roughly $8.77 million today. When advocating for mission-protective provisions, framing matters enormously. Here's what I call the magic sentence, he says. As the leader, it's my judgment that it's essential to our business strategy to be a trustworthy counterparty, and to do that, we need to implement X in order to make promises people can believe. This forces anyone objecting to get specific. Are they questioning your judgment, whether trust matters to strategy? You won't always have the leverage you want. Sometimes you'll have to capitulate, but always try. You're always better off for having asked, especially if you've established these protections before negotiations even began. The time to guard against corruption and tyranny is before they arise. Build your fortress now while you still can. Here's the story I loved in the book. Imagine a Spanish priest arriving in a war-devastated town in 1941, carrying a wooden suitcase of books and radical economic vision. That was Father Jose Maria Arizmendiarreta, and he believed something revolutionary, that ordinary people control their own destiny through education and cooperative enterprise. He didn't rush. For 13 years, he built a foundation. He taught young people not just engineering, but a philosophy rooted in Catholic social teaching, human dignity, mutual aid, the idea that the common good comes before individual profit. Then in 1956, his first class of 5 engineers founded a small company to manufacture paraffin stoves. When it thrived, Father Jose coined a rallying cry that would echo through generations. Zero libreta o maleta. Either invest locally in your community's future or watch your children leave with their suitcases. Today, what started out as one small factory has become Mondragon, Spain's 10th largest business. But here's what makes it extraordinary. It's not a corporation in any conventional sense. It's a constellation of more than 90 independent worker-owned cooperatives, employing over 70,000 people and generating revenues exceeding 11 billion euros annually. You probably encountered their brands: Orona Elevators, Eroski supermarkets, Ika appliances, without realizing they're all part of the same mission-driven network. These cooperatives aren't isolated islands. They're deeply interdependent, sourcing from each other, keeping value circulating within the network rather than leaking it away to distant shareholders. When one struggles, others step in because their futures are genuinely intertwined. This symbiosis creates what he calls beneficial constraints, limitations that actually generate value. Consider what happened in 2013 when Fagor Electrodomesticos collapsed under 800 million euros in debt. 75,000 workers across the network voluntarily accepted a 3% pay cut for 5 years. They injected $70 million to save their colleagues' livelihoods. 81% of displaced workers found new positions within the constellation. This wasn't corporate charity. It was enlightened self-interest rooted in genuine interdependence. The beauty of Mondragon's structure is that it protects the mission even after the founder's death in 1976. Father Jose's ethos outlived him because he locked it into institutional design. The shared governance structures, the solidarity funds, the cooperative bank at the center, they aren't decorative. They're constitutional safeguards. This contrast matters profoundly when we consider Lehman Brothers, where the organizational structure created the opposite dynamic, governance. Governance, I've come to believe, isn't fundamentally about protecting entities. It's about protecting missions. Founder is essentially a lawgiver whose ethos can outlive them if the structure and mission is genuinely aligned. But here's what fascinates him. Mondragon is just one approach among many. John Lewis operates as a Hamiltonian democracy. Vanguard functions as a classical republic. Some organizations use franchising models. Others operate as traditional holding companies. The world contains far more organizational forms than most entrepreneurs realize. The real pattern emerging today is what he calls mission-locked constellations, networks of legally distinct entities with separate governance, bound together by mutual survival stakes and common purpose. These require 3 elements: multiple entities, genuine interdependence, and transcendent mission beyond individual profits. Bob Moore of Bob's Red Mill understood this instinctively. At 81, facing the inevitability of succession, he rejected lucrative buyout offers. Instead, he gave his company to his 700 employees through an ESOP structure. By 2020, his employees owned everything outright, and revenue had grown from $60 million to over $100 million. He solved the founder's deepest dilemmas. How do you ensure your life's work survives you? This pattern repeats across King Arthur Baking, Patagonia, and countless others. The research is compelling. Employee-owned companies are half as likely to go bankrupt, grow sales 3.5% faster annually, and see immediate productivity boosts. Yet most of these successes share one hidden prerequisite. They never took outside investment. Many founders fear that outside capital corrupts the mission. I agree. But this creates an unnecessary tragedy. Thousands of ethical companies now view investment as corruption, while many investors genuinely want to back mission-driven enterprises. The solution lies in what I call the spiritual holding company, a constitutional guardian entity that protects the constellation's mission over time, allowing true long-term partnership with the outside shareholders without fear of financial gravity tearing everything apart. This concept isn't new. Zeiss had one as early as 1885, yet it remains the most radical idea here because it solves a puzzle most founders never imagined they could solve, enduring both your mission and your impact across generations with partners who genuinely care about what you build. So let's get into the spiritual holding company. We'll start talking about something that's probably shaped more of our lives than we realize. You've likely bought a Hershey's chocolate bar, shopped at IKEA, banked at a credit union, worn Patagonia clothing, or used Firefox. Maybe you even interacted with Claude, the AI assistant. If you've done any of these things, you've engaged with what he calls a spiritual holding company, and it's far more common than people realize. Let's start with what it actually is. It's a separate entity with real governance authority over one or more organizations, but unlike traditional holding companies focused purely on financial control, a spiritual holding company safeguards mission. It does this through ownership structures, special voting rights, board appointment powers, and other mechanisms designed specifically to protect and advance core purpose over the long term. The word spiritual here doesn't refer to anything religious. It refers to the animating essence. the spirit of an organization. Mission describes what an organization does, but spirit describes what it is, and this matters hugely. The data on these structures is striking. Foundation-owned companies account for at least 50% of the Copenhagen Stock Exchange's market cap. Global powerhouses like Novo Nordisk, Carlsberg, and A.P. Moller-Maersk operate this way. We see the Maersk containers on ships and on trucks all around the world. Cooperatives generate more than 10% of GDP in 4 countries. Member-owned credit unions serve over 139 million Americans. Collectively, these organizations are worth trillions. But here's what astonishes me. Foundation-owned companies consistently match or exceed the profitability of conventional firms, taking longer-term approaches. They invest more in R&D, they carry less debt, they maintain more stable employment. Most impressively, they enjoy a 6-fold survival advantage. About 60% of foundation-owned companies survive 50 years, compared to about 10% for conventional businesses. These companies shouldn't exist according to business school orthodoxy, yet they thrive. He walks us through 2 examples of how this actually works in practice. When Dario Amodei founded Anthropic, he brought years of studying AI safety, not abstract philosophy, but concrete engineering problems. Could AI systems develop unexpected capabilities, pursue goals with conflicting human values, concentrate enormous power dangerously? These weren't theoretical concerns. They demanded structural solutions. Yet, here was the paradox. How could researchers maintain a safety-first commitment when billions of dollars were at stake? Dario didn't just nod politely at governance advice. He actually followed through. In 2023, Anthropic formally established the Long-Term Benefit Trust, a separate entity with real board power holding special golden shares. When FTX imploded, it shattered their investor base, yet Anthropic raised over $33 billion, reached a $183 billion valuation, and grew to over 2,000 employees. Their reputation as the safety-first lab became their competitive edge. By August 2025, they were producing over $5 billion in run-rate revenue. The essential bet was proving itself. Safer technology makes more money. Now consider Yvon Chouinard in Patagonia. In 2022, Yvon transferred his $3 billion company into a trust structure designed to protect its mission forever. His North Star was simple. We're in business to save our home planet. He created 2 entities, Patagonia Purpose Trust, holding voting stock to control decisions, paired with Holdfast Collective, owning non-voting stock and distributing over $71 million in climate grants within 2 years. Crucially, he included an independent protector role with authority to hold trustees accountable, creating genuine mutual accountability across multiple stewards. Finally, consider Novo Nordisk. In September 2004, the CEO wanted approval for a merger with Cereno, the world's 3rd largest biotech company. Everyone would profit handsomely. But the Novo Nordisk Foundation's articles required a convincing business argument that any merger was necessary for the long-term mission. It wasn't, so the board said no. Here's why this matters. A researcher named Ladi Vijayarnudshkin was in year 13 of a research program so unpromising that management repeatedly threatened to shut it down. Had Novo been absorbed, her project would have certainly been eliminated. But Novo Nordisk stayed independent. Her 30-year journey produced blockbuster therapies, Victoza, Ozempic, and Wegovy. By 2024, Novo Nordisk's market cap exceeded $600 billion. A nonprofit foundation had created almost $500 billion in shareholder value. The patience and steadfastness of a mission-protected structure served shareholders far better than any premium merger could have offered. This is what spiritual holding companies actually do. They create what might seem impossible. Incorruptible organizations with perpetual purpose, genuine agency, and governance structures that protect coherence against all temptations. So what about mission transmission? We've spent considerable time discussing gravity, that invisible force pulling organizations away from their missions. But in this segment, he wants to show us how the strongest organizations don't just resist this pull, but they become gravitational bodies themselves. He starts with Costco and a question that might sound simple. Why do millions of Americans eat safer food every single day without ever setting a food in a Costco warehouse? The answer reveals everything about what he calls mission transmission. Here's how it works. Costco requires suppliers to meet safety standards that often exceed federal requirements. When a produce supplier installs expensive pathogen testing equipment to keep Costco's business, that equipment doesn't just test Costco-bound items, it tests all produce leaving that facility, including competitors' products. The result? A private safety net strengthening the American food system. The numbers are stunning. In 2010, Costco conducted almost 7,000 food safety audits, while the FDA inspected 17,000 domestic facilities. So Costco did 7,000, the FDA did 17,000. But here's what's shocking. The FDA's own Inspector General found that from 2004 to 2008, over half of FDA-regulated food facilities hadn't received a single inspection in 5 or more years. A single retailer controlling 9% of the grocery sales, Costco, performs roughly 1/3 of the nation's food safety audit workload and does it more frequently and consistently than the federal government. Big surprise. This gravitational influence radiating outward through supply chains, competitors, and industry standards, that's mission transmission. Yet, here's the uncomfortable truth. Even mission-driven organizations inadvertently lend their gravity to opposing forces. The Gates Foundation spent hundreds of millions on health programs in Africa while holding $423 million in oil companies whose pollution in Nigeria contributed to the very respiratory diseases they were trying to cure. The solution is embracing mission transmission as a core discipline, as fundamental as strategy or human resources. When SAMA pays living wages to workers in Kenya and Uganda, the impact doesn't stop at their factories. Those workers spend 50% more on education and 60% more on housing. 59,000 people lifted out of poverty. Compare this to Walmart. When Walmart enters a county, local retail wages drop, businesses close, and household earnings fall about 6% over a decade. Costco does the opposite. Their higher wages, which averaged $26 an hour as of the time of the publication, force local businesses to compete, benefiting all the surrounding vendors and the local population. Devoted resources created elder councils, found volunteer teams caring for seniors in their communities. What struck him most was how these councils restored dignity. Many elders had come to see themselves as the throwaway population. These councils reclaimed their role as wisdom keepers, and their voices now directly influence company leadership. Then there's SureFast, created by Zita Cobb, to ensure profits feed the community. They publish economic nutrition labels showing exactly where each dollar goes. Since 2013, SureFast has contributed over $235 million to Newfoundland's GDP. But perhaps the clearest example is Tony's Chocolonely. 3 Dutch journalists, horrified by child labor in cocoa farming, decided to prove ethical chocolate was possible. Today, Tony's generates over 200 million euros annually. So let's talk more about standards. Standards are everywhere. That LEED certification on your office building, the FDA approval on your medication, the fair trade label on your shoes, yet most of us pass by them without a second thought. But standards are far more powerful than we realize. They're trust accelerator. They transmit values across networks of strangers who will never meet. When you buy a product marked organic, you're borrowing credibility that thousands of companies have built over decades. Standards let entire industries reshape themselves around shared values, touching lives across the globe. Here's a story that changed how he thinks about this. In 1959, a Volvo engineer named Niels Bohlin invented the 3-point safety belt, a revolutionary improvement over what existed before. But here's what makes this story remarkable. Rather than patenting it and profiting from it, Volvo's CEO, Gunnar Engalo, made an extraordinary decision. He open-sourced it. He gave it away. He encoded the company's mission, no one should die in a car, directly into the DNA of the entire automotive industry. This decision looked like economic suicide. Volvo was surrendering millions in licensing fees. But something magical happened instead. By the time Volvo retired that patent in 1971, the company had grown 4 times faster than the auto industry itself. When insurers analyzed the data and discovered that 3-point belts reduced serious injuries by 50%, they started offering better rates for safer vehicles. By 1974, the U.S. government made the technology mandatory. Volvo's apparent sacrifice had transformed the entire industry, expanded the market, and made driving safer for everyone. Good standards share three essential attributes. Take the UL mark, that little certification you see on electrical devices. It means one thing with crystal clarity. This won't burn your house down. Second, it involves independent verification. UL doesn't trust manufacturers' claims, they test products in their own labs. Third, the consequences are aligned. Retailers won't stock non-UL products because liability is too high. Insurance companies won't cover fires from uncertified devices. And manufacturers can't access major markets without the mark. Everyone's incentives point in the same direction. Malcolm McLean's shipping container story follows the same pattern, but at an even grander scale. In 1937, watching people unload cargo piece by piece from ships, he had a vision: standardized containers. After building a massive trucking company, he sold everything to pursue this dream. In 1956, the SS Ideal X carried 58 containers at 25% below conventional shipping costs. Like Volvo, McLean gave his patents to the International Organization for Standardization. The 20 and 40-foot containers you see everywhere today, those are McLean's dimensions. Here's what's remarkable, though. When this standard became law, the entire industry didn't just comply, it exploded. Loading costs collapsed from almost $6 per ton to 16 cents. That's a 97% reduction. Sea Land grew from nothing to the world's largest cargo company in 15 years. But McLean didn't capture most of the value. The real prize was the trillions in global trade his standard enabled. By the end of the century, containers transported 90% of world trade. Products became affordable worldwide. A factory in Vietnam could sell to Ohio. A Kenyan farmer could export flowers to London. The pattern here is what he calls the prosperity cascade. Good standards align other organizations' profit motives with the standard's ethos. Volvo made safety profitable for competitors. McLean made efficiency profitable for ports everywhere. The standard setter doesn't force compliance. They make compliance the most lucrative path. This framework is alive and evolving today. J. Cohen Gilbert and Bart Houlihan created B-Lab certification to signal corporate values. Seth Goldman later helped pioneer Purpose Pledge, an even tougher standard with non-negotiable commitments like 20-to-1 pay ratios. And AI entrepreneur Rune Vist discovered something brilliant. He didn't need to build the world's biggest insurance company. He needed to build the standard itself. Here's the real secret. You need adoption to prove value, but you need proven value to get adoption. The only escape is starting small with something that works, then letting the gravitational field build. TCP/IP beat perfect ISO committees. Linux beat theoretically optimal designs. Git took 2 weeks to launch. The question isn't whether you could create a transformative standard, it's whether you will. In this segment, he talks about a new civic infrastructure. The idea for a long-term stock exchange began as a throwaway suggestion in the epilogue of The Lean Startup, which was the first book I read of Eric Ries. For years, nobody took it seriously, but when he started pitching it around, he got what he came to call 2 moons in comprehension, the look people give you when you've suggested something genuinely impossible, like creating a new celestial body. After all, there hadn't been a new stock exchange with a genuinely new listings model in over 50 years. But here's what history teaches us. Every transformative institution we now take for granted, libraries, credit unions, national parks, Wikipedia, even the internet itself, would face that exact same skepticism if it were proposed today. The real breakthrough came from a securities lawyer who said something that changed everything for him. It's not hard, you just fill out a Form 1 application. In that moment, he realized he wasn't building a startup, he was building civic infrastructure. Foundational rules and institutions that enable entire sectors to function. Think about that banana you bought yesterday. Behind it sits the UPC barcode, a standardized shipping container, food safety regulations, central bank, credit card networks, fraud detection systems, dozens of rule-setting organizations you've never even heard of creating the invisible scaffolding that makes modern life possible. Civic infrastructure has 3 defining attributes. First, these organizations wield rule-setting power whose decisions become everyone else's constraints. Second, they're tiny relative to what they govern. The New York Stock Exchange began as 24 brokers under a buttonwood tree in 1792, agreeing to trade only with each other. FICO started with $400 and 2 engineers. And then third, this is essential, trust is their currency. Problem is clear. Our stock market has drifted from long-term value creation. Average holding periods dropped from 8 years in 1960 to 4 months today. Half of all U.S. equity volume now flows through high-frequency traders operating in milliseconds. The infrastructure optimizes for speed, not long-term thinking. The real issue goes deeper. We're facing civilization-scale challenges, AI governance, climate stability, pandemic preparedness, yet we lack the civic infrastructure to address them. When we don't build infrastructure intentionally, it gets built accidentally and badly. Look at medicine. We've known for decades how to reduce preventable hospital errors. Aviation proved it works. After fatal crashes in the 1960s, we created the National Transportation Safety Board. The industry adopted just culture, where errors lead to learning, not punishment. Aviation deaths dropped 95%, yet hospitals still kill thousands through preventable errors every year. Why? The infrastructure isn't there. And that's because by the time someone proposed a National Patient Safety Board, shareholder primacy had already taken hold. Power shapes infrastructure. The pharmacy system reveals how broken this gets. 3 pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, control 80% of prescriptions through practices regulators describe as confusing, unfair, and opaque. They steer patients toward expensive medications, not because they're better, but because the rebate structures reward high prices. A $3,000 drug generates $900 in rebates. A generic that costs $1.60 generates maybe $5. Perverse incentives everywhere. And then Dr. Alex Oshamansky decided not to reform the system. He'd replace it. He built Cost Plus Drug Company with Mark Cuban, manufacturing their own drugs and publishing all prices online. A leukemia drug that retails for $2,000 sells for $30. When Blue Shield of California switched from CVS Caremark to Cost Plus, CVS stock dropped 8.5%. This matters because it shows something crucial. Civic infrastructure can be rewired. Alternatives change what can even be debated. When we face pressure to compromise our listings at LTSE, we had to learn a hard lesson. The standards are the standards. There's no negotiating your mission for short-term gain. We nearly got approved before financial firms lobbied against specific requirements, so we pivoted to principles-based standards instead. Now companies propose how they'll implement our 5 core principles, then legally commit to them. Everything comes back to one question. Does this create an environment where builders can focus on long-term value creation? I stepped aside as CEO in 2022, he said. Civic infrastructure unfolds across decades. The real question became, what would I feel satisfied having built, regardless of whether it succeeds? And here's the paradox at the heart of all of this. The ultimate source of institutional authority isn't institutional at all. You're not stuck in traffic. You are traffic. Each of us, through the choices we make and the systems we support, shapes the civic infrastructure we inhabit. That's both the burden and the extraordinary power we all carry. So that simple observation is where we begin. We're not stuck in traffic, we are the traffic, because it captures something essential about the power we actually hold. Power that's been hiding in plain sight throughout the entire book. We've spent these chapters climbing organizational hierarchies, searching for ultimate authority, for the person at the top who can change everything. And the answer? It's you. Here's what's really happening in our economy. Organizations that genuinely align with human flourishing tap into something universal, an instinct we all carry to support what helps us and others thrive. When companies honor this instinct, they create magnetic advantages. They attract better talent, they earn deeper loyalty, and they build unshakable trust. But this power cuts both ways because of something he calls financial gravity. That gravity is driven by perception, by the values people believe they must embrace to reach the goals. And where does that perception come from? From you, from all of us, right now through every transaction we make, every moment of attention we give, every choice we take or don't take. Companies are obsessed with what they call your willingness to pay. They track it obsessively across every click, every swipe, every purchase. Some exploit this ruthlessly by engineering addiction, which breaks capitalism's core logic. When consent is hijacked through addiction, whether it's tobacco, social media, or vendor lock-in, the entire system collapses. He once knew someone who worked at Instagram, someone who watched Facebook's ownership slowly shift the platform toward relentless advertising. They couldn't stop it, even as they saw it damaging the platform's competitiveness. They'd become addicts making more addicts. But here's the crucial insight. Only you can break this cycle. As a customer, as an employee, as an investor, you have the power to refuse. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a collective action problem. Surely my one choice doesn't matter unless everyone agrees. That's not how it works. Your individual choices aggregate into data that leaders track obsessively. When enough people walk away, patterns emerge. That's how individual gravity becomes collective force. We give this power away cheaply, usually without thinking. We're busy. Systems are opaque. We've been wounded into believing that nothing we do matters anyway. But every choice either solidifies the status quo or draws energy toward alternatives. The inevitability of current systems is an illusion. Many of them are younger than the trees in your local park. Now let's talk about your labor, because it deserves serious consideration. When you join an organization, you're not simply trading time for money. You're lending your skills, your creativity, and your reputation to strengthen whatever vision that company represents. That's gravitational mass. That demands conscious choice. Think of yourself as an organization of one. Just as companies must choose between maximizing human flourishing or extracting value, so must you. If your work aligns with flourishing, prosper without limits. There's no contradiction there. But if you're uncertain or you know your work is extractive, something insidious happens. The gravitational pull gradually normalizes what gets rewarded. Years slip by. You've been reshaping your own values without fully realizing it, strengthening systems you oppose. I understand that survival needs are real for many people, and this conversation isn't directed at them. But if you have choices, and many of us do, there's a third path. It's not cynical retreat, and it's not compromise either. You can shape the world to match your ethos. Research shows that happiness plateaus above $100,000 annually. So if you're earning beyond that from an employer whose values misalign with yours, I call that your maximum ethical salary. Once you've calculated what you genuinely need for security and care, consider what to do with the surplus. You might use raises to work fewer hours while you network toward values-aligned work. You might accumulate an exit cushion. You could contribute that energy to open-source projects or causes that matter, or start something new aligned with human flourishing. Often the most satisfying path of all. People I've worked with made more money this way while sleeping better at night. Throughout this book, the answer has never been asking people to settle for less. Costco didn't compromise on their hot dog price. Tony's Chocolonely serves superior chocolate. Devoted Health didn't sacrifice health outcomes. These organizations win by being better, not by demanding sacrifice. Your choices matter enormously. Lend your gravity to organizations committed to human flourishing, and you'll be better off. Because when given fair competition, these companies simply make more money. The monster you're fighting isn't out there. It's the systems you strengthen with every choice. So be careful. Choose consciously. You have more power than you think. At the end of the book, he says, there's something I need to tell you about this book, and it's something I've been thinking about since the very first word went on the page. A book dies the moment the words hit the page. It really does. Those letters, those sentences, those arguments, they're just ink and paper or pixels on a screen until you read them, until you take them in, turn them over in your mind, metabolize them into something that means something to you. And here's the thing he wants us to understand. You have the final say, not him. What these ideas mean, how they change you, that's entirely up to you. I know not everyone makes it all the way through a book like this. So those of you who've stayed this far, he wants to offer something really different. Not more arguments, not more evidence, a choice, a vision, really. Throughout these pages, he tried to pull back the curtain on some uncomfortable truths about financial gravity, about how organizations really work, about the mechanisms that keep us trapped. But he says, let me be honest with you about something even more uncomfortable. You've always known there was another way, a darker way. Every single tool I've given you in this book, every insight, every framework, it could all be weaponized. You could take what you've learned and use it to climb higher, faster, to manipulate, to advance yourself at the expense of others. And frankly, I wish you luck if that's your path. I mean that. You don't need my blessing. But I want to ask you to imagine something with me, he says. Picture yourself weeks or months from now. You're holding your notes, you're preparing for your ascent, then something happens. You wake, like from a dream, and you're standing in a wasteland. It's barren, stripped mined down to nothing. And dominating everything there are colossal things. megalith beasts with skeletons made of spider legs stretching up into an endless sky. Their shadowy sinews reach down, 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 gripping people in long chains of bondage, half-asleep people doing what they're told, going through the motions. Then you see her, a figure armed with a golden scythe, but she's not using it to wound. She's using it to cut, to liberate, to perform mercy. You follow her gaze backward through time, and suddenly you understand those sinews wrapped around people, those chains of control, they're pulled by thousands of puppet strings, reaching back through history. Cruel fathers, brutal conquistadors, atrocities half forgotten but not yet past, all of it still gripping in the present moment. But here's what strikes you. She's not even looking at the beasts. She's looking past them. And what she sees are small, brilliant lights, thousands of them, maybe more, scurrying across the cracked ground, slipping in and out of the spaces between the massive structures, like mammals waiting for their moment in a world still dominated by dinosaurs. Then she looks directly at you, and her expression becomes a question, an invitation. You look down at your own hands, and you understand the choice before you. Hands turned upward toward the sky, or turned away toward the dusty ground. When you wake from this vision, and you will wake, you may forget it entirely. You'll go back to your work. You'll thrive. You'll move forward. But maybe weeks from now, maybe months, maybe years, there'll be a sharp moment, a flash of memory, her face, that look, and you'll be gripped with a question that won't let go. What happened next? Did you turn your hands upward? Well, did you? So we reached the end of the book, and for a change, I'm almost speechless. I believe in what he's teaching, and he's really been very generous and provided both an analysis and a guide for all of us to follow to make sure that we have the power to configure whatever we create so that it continues to serve the mission that inspired us to create it to begin with. Eric also includes a far greater number of examples in the book and a number of valuable resources accessible via QR codes in the appendix, including implementation guides, the Incorruptible community, reader's guides for consumers, for employees, for investors, for board members and founders, all accessible via the QR codes in the back of the book. So I highly recommend this book for everybody who is founding a business, who has grown a business and is still managing it. Putting these safeguards in place will ensure that the mission that you embarked on is carried out long after you move on. This has been Incorruptible by Eric Ries. Everything we covered today lives inside a larger pattern I've seen tracking across product development, med tech, and now AI systems. The simple pattern. The work doesn't usually fail where everyone's looking, but it fails in the gaps. Between disciplines, these get missed a lot. Between the demo and production, between AI capability and AI control, between what the system can do once and what it costs, risks, and requires when it has to work at scale. That's the thread running through my work at InnoGuide and Get Wrangler. At InnoGuide, I help teams apply system thinking, AI strategy, and product architecture to reduce risk before it becomes rework. At GetWrangler.ai, we're building the control layer for AI usage, helping teams see where LLMs are being called, where token spend is going, where workflows are burning cost, and where a request may not need an LLM at all. Because the next decade will not belong to teams that simply use more AI. It'll belong to teams that know how to manage it. If you want to connect, you can find me at www.innoguide.net or at getwrangler.ai. And if you're working through these challenges with AI usage, cost, agents, workflows, or governance, the GPX Forum by Get Wrangler is where we're bringing operators together to map the best path through the use of AI resources. That's where to find me. I want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this, and I really want to thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you next time. That's a wrap.